1 year in, and there is no disputing President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s hold on power. His signature policy measure, the Maharlika Investment Fund, has passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. His appointment of Gilbert Teodoro as Defense Secretary for the second time signals a consolidation in his efforts to reform the pension system for military and uniformed personnel. And his cousin and constant traveling companion, Speaker Martin Romualdez, has nipped a potential leadership challenge in the proverbial bud. Is there anything, practically speaking, that stands in the president's way? Let's probe the limits of the president's power. Good evening, I'm John Nery, and you are in the public square. As we mark the first year in office of the second Marcos in history, we note that so much has changed in the last 10 or 11 months. After the initial missteps in the office of the executive secretary, the Marcos presidency seems to have recovered its footing. After President Duterte's risky and ultimately failed gamble to hitch the country's fortunes to China, President Marcos has stoked a warming in Philippine-American relations whose effects can readily be seen. And after a reckless attempt to present the Maharlika Fund as a fait accompli in Davos last January, the president can finally sign the scheme into law. It seems clear this presidency has successfully consolidated its power. And yet, there are internal dynamics to take account of. 3 outstanding political scientists will do the accounting tonight. Dr. Jean Encinas Franco of the University of the Philippines, who joins us by Zoom from Quezon City. Professor Arjan Aguirre of the Ateneo de Manila University, who joins us also by Zoom from Iloilo City, where the Philippine Political Science Association is holding its annual conference. And Professor Cleve Argelies of De La Salle University, who is also President and CEO of WR Numero Research. He joins me here in the studio. Good evening, Jean.
Hi,
Cleve?
good evening. Good evening, Cleve. Good evening, Arjun. Good evening, John.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the public square. Let me start. So I have the same question for all of you. The Maharlika Investment Fund will become law. How much of the president's political capital do you think was used to make sure that it passed? Jean, let me start with you.
Well, I think the fact that it passed speedily in the Senate, despite the valid concerns of economists and other financial analysts, then it says a lot about the political capital of the president, in both houses of Congress. But they are probably banking on the president's popularity and the fact that whatever happens, it's not going to be probably be immediate. I mean, the result will probably not be felt immediately. And lastly, I think few Filipinos really know about these things such as investment funds, insurance, savings. That's something that's still very much far from the minds of ordinary Filipinos. So probably we're just very conscious of the things that we see on our Twitter feeds. But so that's something that especially people who are running for re-election in 2025 are already seeing, no? Well, aside from the fact that they also want to curry favor from the president.
Yes. Cleve, I get this sense sometimes that it passed in the Senate as it did in the House because the president wanted it. In the end, it boiled down to that. Tama ba yun? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would even describe it as sort of a gift from the Congress to the president as a sign of their loyalty. It really appeared that this is a very important agenda of the Marcos Jr. administration, right? And that even though, for example, even though there are some concerns from some senators, they just rather be absent, like Senator Chis Escudero, than outright vote against the law. That says a lot about how serious the Marcos Jr. administration when it comes to the Maharlika law. I also think one of the considerations here is that we've been asking whether this has cost the president some political capital, right, or whether it didn't cost him at all. But I also think that from my perspective, this is also a very important part of how he will consolidate his political power close to the midterm elections. Because this would mean that he will have the administration will have a very huge amount of money that is not going to be audited, that will not be subject to usual constraints on the public budget, right? And we know that state resources are always used in our elections. This is a big, this is an item that would definitely attract many local and national politicians on his side. So he's probably being very strategic at this point to ensure that he will be able to consolidate political players.
Yeah, maybe we'll have time later to talk about what a previous guest of mine, Mr. Villanueva, said was the recipe for a slush fund. But Arj, Professor Aguirre, I wanted to ask you, so my assumption this time was the president spent some political capital, but from the answers of Jean and Cleve, I get also the sense that maybe it is the senators who actually used up some of their political capital just to pass this law.
Yeah, because if you remember, this measure was only made, a priority or, certified as urgent only, 22nd of May. So that only tells us that perhaps there was, a negotiation that took place that convinced the president to, to assist or, to really push for this legislation to take place or to happen. So that was the only time that, Senate really delivered. And you know what happened, days after, they really did, a good job in passing this measure at the Senate. And to me, this also, reveals to us the kind of dynamics, involving the presidency and, of course, the Senate. So I think there were so many concessions made, to really activate or mobilize, our senators. And I just want also to highlight, the role of Mark Villar as the leading, senator who was really
proponent.
busy, pushing for the passage of Maharlika bill in the Senate.
So the president enjoys two successive high survey results. He has majorities in both houses of Congress. He is enjoying a lot of goodwill from the warming U.S.-Philippine relations. No? But I also have to point out that, for instance, in the case of the Maharlika Investment Fund, he actually wanted to present this as a done deal in Davos. And yet the Senate said no in December and took maybe 5 months. Is this the cost of so-called politically distancing themselves from the president, or was this, just a zarzuela? Jean and then Cleve?
No, I think some senators were really concerned in the beginning, but then in the end, it's politics that's more important to them rather than really thinking thoroughly about the consequences of the law that they're making.
Cleve?
The Senate traditionally is the house of Congress that is more sensitive to public opinion, especially what is, whatever it is that we would call as national public opinion, right? I got the sense that the Senate, given their concerns, was also waiting if a strong public opinion will develop around this issue, and whether they could use that, right, to whether revise it thoroughly or completely disown or completely forget about it, right? But I guess that during this period, they didn't really get that kind of public opinion that's strong enough for them to build on that, right, and act as their capitalize on that, right, to exercise their independence from the executive. So I think that the decision to just let it pass, despite a few tweaks, is a result of that. That these senators were they're definitely an ally of the administration, right? But I was thinking also that if there was a strong public opinion, they could use that, right, to just say no to this particular bill.
Arj, I know that you've engaged before with senators. You're familiar with how Senate offices work. I wonder if the president, essentially, as Gene said, called in his political markers. I said, okay, I want you to vote for this. There's no ifs or buts, right? My question is this something that we can expect more of from the president, or it's something that we should actually expect less of now that the president has called in one very important, very substantial political marker?
Yeah, I think it will really depend on, who are those people in the Senate, okay, who can, deliver something to the president. I mean, who are the players in the Senate? For example, again, if you have noticed, again, it was Senator Mark Villar who was, very active in pushing for, the passage of Maharlika bill. And of course, don't forget the Senate President, Miguel Zubiri was also involved. So these people, they are considered to be, the power brokers in the, in the upper chamber of our Congress. The president, I'm sure, knows what to do in the future. I mean, who to talk to. But again, it will really depend on who those people are. Okay, who can deliver something to the president. So again, we can expect that senators who can really mobilize votes, because in the Senate you have blocks operating, depending on their interests, their priority bills. Again, for the future situations, you can expect these people to engage the presidency. Again, as I have highlighted earlier, this power dynamics in the Senate involving the president usually involves concessions. Okay, their priority bills, and of course the agenda of the president. They usually have this agreements, discussions, what bills to be passed, what bills to be relegated. So again, that's what usually happens, between the Senate and the president.
One issue that I am particularly concerned about is the possibility of charter change. And from the very start, I think Speaker Martin Romualdez has been behind a push for charter change in the lower house. We know that others also are thinking about it, but the president himself has not said much about this. I wonder, though, whether what we've seen with the Maharlika Investment Fund is some sort of template, like for understanding how the president will move. For instance, the president did not certify this as urgent in the Senate until last week, right? But it was already filed several months ago. The president, it's becoming clear to me that the president waxes cool, and then there are players in his coalition that wax hot. No? So you have Martin Romualdez saying we have to do this. You have Amy Marcos, pushing for essentially propaganda for their late father and so on. So I wanted to ask you, all three of you, is this the template that we're seeing for charter change or others eventually? Jean?
Yeah, I think so because I also get the sense that there's no framework from the very beginning for governing the country such that, if push comes to shove, then they have to sort of the what do you call this the people behind the president will really try their best to convince the president of the merits of this certain proposal. And that tells you that from the very beginning, um, they're still trying to feel their way a year into the office.
Do you share that view also? They're still feeling their way about the levers of power?
Right. I think it's something to do. I tend to say yes to that. I also think that it also means that because he got into Malacanang with a huge coalition, right, of different political players, different power brokers. So this also means that during the past year, it's about who gets to move first, right? Who gets to establish his base and boundaries and turf first, right? And for different issues, for different agendas, it could be easy. But an initiative like the charter change that really demands kind of like a top level, unity. I don't want to use that word anymore, but a top level agreement, kind of like with the key power brokers, right? That we will do this simultaneously at the same time. We will spend our political energies on this, right? So that's why I think that's why it's harder despite having good popularity, a high electoral mandate, right? That it's still harder because the cost of collective action of you have to mobilize all of the people inside the coalition to make the charter change initiative work, as opposed to just mobilizing a part of these coalitions for certain initiatives.
Yes. Many different parties coming together, but in fact, only two major blocks, right? Marcos and Duterte. Arj, I'd like to ask you, maybe we can go into internal dynamics now. How do you see the relationship now between the president and the vice president?
So again, coming from what my colleague Cleve has already mentioned, this presidency was built on a promise that that they will deliver change our situation in our country through this unity framework. So it was built on a coalition kind of politics, and just like all coalitions out there, you expect in this groups coming together, a powerful bloc dominating. Of course, they offer something to the other parties to come in, and these other parties are expected to deliver something. They have a role, they have a function, and with this understanding of what coalitions are and how they work, we should not forget that coalitions are not always stable. So coalition stability is based on the ability of the powerful bloc to deliver, fulfill the promises that were made, and of course, the other participants are also expected to deliver and fulfill their promise. Now, what is happening nowadays is that things are becoming fluid, in the sense that with these two powerful blocs, the Marcos and of course the Sara Duterte Carpio bloc, you now see some cracks, tensions because of I'm so sorry to mention this, but of course the inequality, okay, when it comes to who holds what, okay, the cabinet portfolios. For instance, you can see that many people who were appointed by the president are connected to Sara Duterte Carpio's bloc, okay, former appointees or people who are known to be close to Sara Duterte, and of course her mentor, former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. And I think many people in the Marcos bloc, the bigger bloc, okay, are not comfortable with that kind of setup. So again, there's always tension in a coalition because of this inequality. Okay, so that's what I would like to highlight regarding this growing tensions. We are on the first year, so I think this will, eventually become bigger in the coming years.
Professor Franco, I wanted to ask you, Arch has already pointed to GMA and Inday Sara, but there are two other powerful women also who happen to be power centers in this administration. That would be the sister, Amy, and also the First Lady, Liza. You've done a lot of research on the role of women in politics, feminism in politics. I'd like to ask you, how should we read the relationship between these four power centers led by women? Can you offer us a framework based on what we're seeing right now?
There are only, in the 2019 and 2022 elections, OMELEC data says that there are only 2 women out of 10 10 candidates, no? So, 2 babae at 8 mga lalaki ang tumatakbo. And that's unfortunate, no? Currently, we only have 23% women in all levels of government. Again, that's sad. But, the way in which these women are also visible, in the public sphere is, I think, okay. But the fact that they are pitted against each other is not very good to me. It's just like the telenovelas in which women are made to quarrel with each other instead of portraying examples of oneness, of solidarity, which women are very good at in real life. No?
Professor Aguiles, we mentioned, we've discussed Sara. She is, in fact, of course, a power in her own right. But she also asked to be defense secretary. And the president said no, gave her a much bigger portfolio on paper. And then the president appointed at least 2 other defense secretaries who turned out to be only OICs or acting defense secretaries. But yesterday, finally appointed a permanent defense secretary, Balik DND Gibo Chodoro. How do you read this in terms of internal dynamics of the Marcos administration?
Right. I think it's when President Marcos Jr. Came into power, like any other presidents, one of the key challenges is always the buy-in of the defense establishment, right? The military and all its attached agencies, headed symbolically, of course, by the DND. That's why we were all speculating that must be the reason why it wasn't given to the vice president, right? It was too important for the administration security and legitimacy to give it to the head of the other, to give it to the other power broker inside the coalition, right? And now that a year after, and we see that very interestingly then, the appointment of Secretary Gibo Chodoro was done as soon as the Congress was no longer in session, right? Para hindi na muna dumaan sa Congress scrutiny, right? So this is a usual practice naman. I do think that what it means is that the president feels comfortable with his relationship with the military establishment, is now ready to bring in a civilian. I mean, si Secretary Gibo naman, hindi naman siya new player. He's he's a politician on his own right, but still a civilian, right? So I think it's on the one hand, as a political observer, I'm happy to see that we have a civilian running our defense establishment, which should be the case, right, as a Republican country. But on the other hand as well, ito nga, na to me, the internal dynamics suggest that the president feels that he can now have someone run the show in the person of Secretary Gibo. And di ba merong issue on the pension,
a very big one.
It's a big issue. Di ko nga alam kung what our people in the military are feeling, because we're suddenly raising 500 billion pesos for the Maharlika Fund, and yet we're also asking the military to i-let go yung kanilang mga previously agreed benefits, right? So medyo test. Pero if the president, thought that we can handle these tensions, right? And he now has a civilian defense secretary. Of course, also we know that very close to former President Arroyo, 'di ba? So ano din, may balancing din, no? Meron ding has something to do, I think, also with the foreign policy direction of the country, where since Marcos came to power, we have been pivoting closely, no, back to the United States, which is our traditional stance naman as the stance of Malacanang. And maybe this is a way to balance that, right?
Yeah. Cliff, you've raised so many issues. If we have time, maybe we can talk about the ad interim appointment, which for me, it signifies actually a weakness on the part of the president. There was an entire month left. No, he could have appointed them a month ago, but chose the ad interim route. But Arch, I want to bring up something that Cleve has already pointed to. So the role of Gibo Teodoro. So Gibo is not only allied with GMA, but actually has a reputation where even Beijing likes him. If I'm not mistaken, he was the only defense secretary who actually managed a supply agreement with the Chinese. If I'm not mistaken, the only time we bought stuff from the Chinese was under his leadership at DND. So there's something there, I think, that recommends him to Beijing. But I think at the same time, the U.S. likes him. He's U.S. educated and so on. Arj, how would you read Gibo Teodoro's appointment as defense secretary in the context of all these things, including foreign policy?
Yes, he's the best, candidate for that position.
Yeah.
So not only that he topped the bar, he was an accomplished congressman before. He's a seasoned cabinet member for former President Lorma Pagal Arroyo. Everyone loves him, in the security cluster, even in the media. I mean, he's the best, person to occupy the position. But of course, we can also expect that both, blocks, the Marcos and of course Sara Duterte, Carpio's, side, they have their own, candidate for that position. So again, that's my understanding. He's the best candidate that that can really please both parties. We can expect that other positions, other people in the cabinet who will be appointed soon, because I'm also expecting that there will be new people to be appointed. The first two new secretaries, they are just the first salvo, because again, I expect this cabinet reshuffling to happen in the coming days before SONA, because again, the understanding there is that the power share is also changing within the government. And I think again, going back to what I have mentioned earlier, this cabinet reshuffling, I think, ignited this tension between these two camps in the past 2 weeks.
Jean, do you share that view that there is real tension between the two main camps, Marcos and Duterte?
Well, that's what we're getting, no? Of course, we're not privy to their conversations, but the mere fact that people are talking about it means that people are so used to having these coalitions, and after some time, these coalitions fall apart, mainly because of either there's a midterm election or there's a national election coming up, or one person changed his or her mind. It on the one hand, sometimes it brings stability, but in the longer term, it's not good, because our politics is based on shifting coalitions, which should not be the case. No, we should have a more stable, more stable political parties actually.
Part of the reason we know these things is the Duterte alternative media ecosystem has
Yes.
been criticizing Marcos and some of the Marcos policies. No? So, for
Yes.
instance, the repivoting to the U.S., I mean, that's taken a lot of criticism from the pro-Duterte bloggers and
Yes.
thought leaders and so on. Cleve, how should we read that? How should we understand that then?
Yeah, I think this is one of the legacies of Duterte's electoral victory. This is politics post-Duterte time,
Okay.
right? That to be able to shifting coalitions, as Professor Jean has pointed out, also tracks or aligns with those who are identified as sort of their propagandists online, right? Because there should be a one-to-one correspondence between what they're saying in the mainstream media and what appears on the alternative media. Especially that, this maybe is a totally different topic, but especially that, syempre, we have mixed viewership now in terms of the media, diba? Some are, more online, some are in the TV, radio, and different kinds of media consumption. So to be able to succeed in politics in our present time is to be able to also dominate public conversations online. Kaya if you want, if you're one of the power brokers and you want to, attack or shoot down a member of your coalition coming from the other camp, no, you have to also mobilize your online supporters. And so yun. So nakita natin because the messaging, diba? What is very interesting is that the messaging aligns well, diba, with the principle, right? So yeah. So I think yun lang na it's this post Duterte politics na ito na yung ginagawa ng ating mga politicians.
Yeah. Also, we need to point out that the president himself continues to play his role as part of an alternative media ecosystem. He vlogs and so on, not to reach people where they are, right? But Arch, I wanted to ask you about Martin Romualdez, so a very influential player, of course, right? But about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, there was this extraordinary editorial in Manila Times criticizing Martin Romualdez for always traveling with the president and saying, this is the Manila Times editorial, saying the Congress could have done more if he didn't travel so much. And I saw this because this was pushed out, this was tweeted by Dante Ang Jr., the son of the owner of Manila Times, and I think he's the publisher of the Manila Times now. How should we read this very interesting situation?
Yeah. I'd like to mention the fact that, aside from coalitional politics, we should not forget that, our coalitions these days are constituted by dynasties. Okay? So you have here a first cousin who, thinks that he should have more or he deserves more in terms of power, knowing that his first cousin is the president, and of course the son of that president is currently serving in the Congress. His also first cousin is is in the Senate. So that is, I think, it's what is inside the mind of the House Speaker. He wants more. And I think that is the reason why I think that is the motivation behind, his recent, advancements, his, assertions. He wanted to have more control. Again, he's already the House Speaker. He wants more control in terms of, having more effective control when it comes to the party of Lakas, when it comes to what bills to be passed. Remember, Martin Romualdez, or the House Speaker, is also one of the first people who pushed for the Maharlika bill. So I think he really wants to prove himself that that he is a power player also.
Is
Perhaps
Arj, is the Times editorial pushback from the Duterte camp saying, si Sara muna. I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
perhaps.
you can build your own future, but Sara muna.
Yes, and I think that is also, one of the reasons why nowadays you can see that, the tension between Sara Duterte, Carpio, and of course House Speaker Martin Romualdez is becoming more, serious by the day.
And may I add,
Yes, Jean.
John, that let us not forget that once upon a time, Dante Ang, the father,
Mhm.
was once affiliated with Gloria Macapagal Arroyo.
Mhm. That's
No?
right, yes.
But I agree with the editorial. I agree that the House Speaker should not be with the President all the time. Unlike si Bongo noon, hindi naman siya Speaker of the House, di ba? Before he became
Yes.
Senator.
Just the Senator of the Republic.
Before he became Senator.
Yes, before he became senator. Yes, this is the thing, eh. You know, we make jokes, we call him the national photo bomber, and before we know it, he's a member of the Senate. May mga butas pa yung cabinet, no? So, for instance, agriculture, it's still the president who serves as agriculture secretary, like his father, no? At one point, his own father also served, but only for a few months as agriculture secretary. Who do you think he's preparing that seat, keeping that seat warm for, Clive?
I can only speak about what I've been hearing. Yeah, there were interesting names being floated, but I think what I find interesting is the name of the former Trade Secretary Mar Rojas, right, being floated as a potential DA secretary, right. It will definitely be politically interesting. I think that would be the least, right, if we see this. But I'm also very interested with the fact that until now, the president hasn't been able to pass on the secretaryship of the agriculture, of the Department of Agriculture. I think it's something to do with the fact that for at least so far, he can't really, because his reason why he had to be on top of the agriculture department, but because he was supposed to bring down the price of food, rice in particular, right, improve the food security situation of many Filipinos, and we haven't really seen any improvement on those issues, right? In fact, in some cases, it has worsened. Like the inflation and the cost of food is really, really high. So I think he's kind of like stuck there now. Like he couldn't leave, because if he leaves, he doesn't have anything to show. What would like if I was an ordinary, as an ordinary Filipino, what would I associate as his contribution as Secretary of Agriculture? I would have to think hard, right? Aside from all these issues about sugar importation, right? So yeah, I think it has something to do with that as well. But I look forward to learning how he would, if he would be able to still pass, because as Arch was saying, the expectation is that the cabinet reshuffling should be done before SONA. But my expectation is that it won't probably be for the DA. I think he will have to keep it because of what I've been saying, that he is still waiting for
it.
Yeah, he may be, yeah.
Jean, I wanted to ask you about that trial balloon involving Mar Rojas. In a previous life, you served as a high-ranking official of the Senate. So you know how things work, right? So do you think that there was in fact a floating of the name of Mar? I want to note that as soon as that name was floated, the Duterte faction, went to town, saying like this is a red line. There's no way that he can join the administration. How should we understand this floating? I've seen it floated twice. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I would understand why the supporters of Marcos Jr. are floating that idea because it's going to give them legitimacy, more legitimacy. Because it's like, hey, one of those identified with the Dilawan camp, is now with us, and that's something that would sort of demoralize some people, and so that's going to be plus points for them, and yeah, probably it's a mere trial balloon, but the mere fact that we can even talk about it says a lot that they're probably trying their best to look for other people to make the cabinet seem as if they're really for, ayoko na sabihin, unity naman.
It's a bad
How
word.
come nobody wants to say unity?
It's a bad word now.
No, but I guess he might be going for that. No? And also, I'm reminded of what Arj said, no, about the dynastic nature of our politics. Mar is a cousin of Liza Araneta Rojas. Their children are friends, grew up together, don't see any political differences. So the possibility is there, but I don't know whether they've actually talked to him. And again, I don't know whether that is a red line, no, for the Duterte faction. Arj, I wanted to ask you about Laila De Lima. So today, in her last remaining case, her motion for bail was denied, which I think is continuing travesty. But Arj, do you think that this is also a red line for the Duterte supporters? They've communicated to the president and the president's deputies that there is no way they will see Laila freed.
Yeah, I really expect that, the Marcos camp will really take this seriously. I mean, the Laila case, because if they release Senator Laila, that would, automatically mean that, the cases that were filed, the accusations that, that were entertained during the time of former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte are false. So they are connected. So again, the understanding here is that the Marcos camp will do its best to, to keep this as a bargaining chip, perhaps, with the Duterte dynasty. So I think they will delay, perhaps that they will really try their best to delay the process. And this is very unfortunate for the former senator. But again, they will use this as as a
Arj?
bargaining chip.
Yeah, can I ask, bargaining chip for what? Or even the ICC case, no? Whether to
Yeah.
actually welcome the investigation. Bargaining chip for what?
They will use this during perhaps a moment or a time that they would ask something for more on the part of the Duterte dynasty. So if they will sense that the Duterte dynasty will try to undermine the government's hold to power, again they will use this Laila De Lima's case, the ICC case, against the father, okay, of the vice president, Sara Duterte Carpio.
We can keep talking for hours. We're all political junkies as well, but we're running long. So maybe I'd like your last thoughts on this. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that on the one hand, rather, the president has in fact consolidated his power, but on the other hand, he continues to need to strike a balance. Not only between Marcos and Duterte, but between Arroyo and other political players. Can I ask Arj and then Cleve, and we'll end with Jean? What are your thoughts on this? What is your overall perspective now, 1 year in, on the Marcos presidency? Yes, Arj.
Okay, so this coalition is something that won't last forever. Its stability is based on the capability of the power bloc to to be effective in giving an offer that is realizable, something that can be fulfilled, and of course we can also expect that this power bloc is also capable of engaging a demand from other people. So again, that will, I think, really make this administration or government successful. So it will really depend on how well they are, in handling this coalition. So in the coming years, we expect more tensions, more, ruptures to appear. So good luck to, the sitting president, in handling those, pressures, okay, coming from those powerful groups within the coalition.
Thank you. Cleve?
A year into power, a president that is popular like Marcos Jr. is not really unusual, right? When it comes to Philippine politics, most of Philippine presidents enjoy high popularity during their first year in power. It's the usual honeymoon period, right? We also expect that they would have some, if not really strong influence on both houses of Congress, and we see that now. But I also think that there are signs that this myth that they have been selling, that Marcos and Duterte are in power, is going to be tested really soon, right? There's only one president, there's only one family in Malacanang, and that's not the Dutertes, right? And this has also something to do, for example, with former Senator Laila De Lima. I think my take on that is that it has something to do with the fact that if they release, or if the Marcos administration won't hold Senator Laila, it would mean that this myth that both the Marcoses and the Duterte are in power, that would be shattered. And finally, despite the popularity and despite the electoral mandate that this president won, I think that he's still quite, he still under-delivered and still quite unremarkable. I was expecting really something earth-shattering, or that will change the landscape of Philippine politics, because a year into Duterte, we were all rewriting what we know about Philippine politics, right? I was teaching Philippine politics during that time. I had to revisit what I understood to be the classic ideas and classic explanations of how Philippine politics operates, right? And now, a year into the Marcos presidency, I think my frameworks, my slides are still kind of useful, right? I still haven't have to revise them. So,
except for the pivot to the repivot to the US.
Yeah, and the priorities of the current administration is quite interesting. It has something to do with, foreign policy, maybe security, not really so much and the Maharlika, right? So it's also very interesting what they're spending their first year on, because this is supposedly the easiest time for the administration to work on anything, and they chose to use it on foreign trips and the Maharlika, which is probably very important for them, for the family. But aside from that, I would have had a more positive assessment of the Marcos administration first year into power if they were already doing charter change now, despite my suspicions about that. But I would have had, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to make clear the distinction between consolidating power, which is a different thing, from achieving something results in the politics. And Jean?
Yeah, let's face it, this administration ran to win, no? And they did it quite successfully with a very strong mandate. But unfortunately, governing was an afterthought, such that they had to really, grapple their way into their first year into office. And I am also one with Cleve in saying that I was expecting earth-shattering proposals, no, something that would excite his base, but I did not see it, no, given their very strong mandate. And it's, if I were a supporter, it would be unfortunate that it's unfortunate that I was witness to these parties and constant traveling during the first few days and months into office, no. And my sense is that at the end of the day, Marcos should not rely on the fact that he is in power to revitalize the Marcos name, because it prevents him from playing into the political interest of other people within his supposed coalition. Because it's personal to you, I would understand that, no? It's very personal to him, but he has to get out of that sort of, I don't know if it's a bubble or mindset. I mean, because it might alienate some people that will be there to support him in whatever agenda he has, no? And remember, he is not a Duterte. Duterte was a very powerful, what do you call this, rightly or wrongly, to his political base, the way he speaks, his demeanor. But then, what he's using now is also a benefit, no, of how Duterte did it, no. I mean, he uses social media, and he has this alternative ecosystem. So the public, his political base may see him differently than how we see him in the traditional media. So I think this, moving forward, this is probably what we will see in the next years.
Thank you, Professors Jean Encinas Franco, Cleve Argelies, and Arjan Aguirre. Your academic research and your continuing engagement in public issues help define and are themselves a defense of the public square. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, John. Bye, Cleve. Bye, Arjan.
Thank you.
Bye, bye. Bye, ma'am.
That's it for us tonight. The next step for engaged citizens is always to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.